Well, now, what have we learned until now? Basically, as a review, we've seen so far that the idea of Avram Avinu, is that the idea is that as a result of his avodah, which he worked for many years, of course, then what we have is the idea that Avram now personified the Merkava, and this is what I mentioned last week, that the idea of the Merkava means that Avram became a chariot, and that means that the purpose of a chariot is to bring the driver to its destination. So therefore, Avram was now that Merkava. In other words, he would be the Mesakin. He would be the one that would bring the Rebbeinu Shalom back into the Bria. And that would be the Tikkun. Both he and his descendants. That is what's meant by a Merkava. That he would be the vehicle by which the Hester that the Rebbeinu Shalom originally put into the Bria, and also the Hester that was contributed by man, that Hester would now be removed through the Avodah of Avram and his descendants. Therefore, he and his descendants would now be the Mesaknim. And this, of course, means that they would be termed Yisrael. And that, of course, is the entire purpose of the Bria, of the universe, is to have a Yisrael, a people that actually is involved in the task of bringing the Rebbeinu Shalom into the Bria, from which he was previously absent. In other words, Avram would be involved, and his descendants, they would be involved in Gili Chudai, to reveal the unity of the Rebbeinu Shalom in the Bria. And as a result of that, the Hester, which of course was in the Bria, would be removed. Now that Gili Chudai specifically really refers to Yichud Shlitosai, which means that Avram and his descendants would be revealing the true underlying cause of the Bria, and that is the Yichud of the Shlit of the Rebbeinu Shalom throughout. In other words, that the Rebbeinu Shalom, he himself is the supreme master, ruler, or authority in the Bria, and that nothing, absolutely nothing, goes on without the Rebbeinu Shalom's cause. That's Yichud Shlitosai. The idea that the Rebbeinu Shalom is the supreme master and ruler, supreme authority. This Yichud Shlitosai is what the Jews would be revealed in the Bria. And this is what's called Tikkun Malchus. Now what that is that the Melucha, the kingdom, or the kingship, or the fact that the Rebbeinu Shalom is a Melech, a king, was hidden from the Bria. So therefore, Malchus, the idea of his kingdom, was hidden. We do not see the Rebbeinu Shalom as a Melech. Therefore, the task of the Yisrael, which is Avram and his descendants, would be to be Mesakin, that Hester of Malchus. That's called Tikkun Malchus. That's what it really means. To bring the Rebbeinu Shalom back into the Bria, to indicate his Melucha, the fact that he's a Melech throughout. So therefore, Avram Avinu and his descendants, instead of mankind, would be involved in Gili Yechudoi, or specifically the Yichud Shlitosai, which means, in effect, that his Malchus, the kingdom of God, would be restored to the Bria, and this is the task of man, to Mesakin that Hester, which means to Mesakin the Hester of the Malchus, the fact that the Rebbeinu Shalom is hidden in the sense that he's the king of the Bria, the supreme absolute authority. This is what the Rebbeinu Shalom wants of the Jews, and therefore Tikkun Malchus is another way of summing up the entire Avodah, just like Gili Yechudai is another way of summing up the entire Avodah. And this is, of course, all indicated symbolically by the idea of a Merkava, or a chariot. Now, not only would Avram be involved, of course, but what he was ensuring is that he and all his descendants would also be involved. That all he and his descendants would be involved in the actual act of being Mesakin. Now, besides that, what has to be niskan, what has to be corrected? And originally, of course, there was only one Hester that had to be niskan, and that was the original deficiency of the presence of God. And it was the fact that God was absent, his Malchus was absent. That deficiency, which was caused by Rebbeinu Shalom, this is what Klal Yisrael has to, or rather, this is what man was chosen to bring into the Bria. However, as a result of man's sin, there is a new tikkun, and that is the tikkun or new correction, and that is that man must now correct the double Hester, the fact that he himself has contributed to the concealment of the Rabban Shalom in the Bria. So therefore we now talk about two tikkunim, that the Masaknin, of course, as designated symbolically as a Merkava, is Avram and his descendants, and the actual tikkun itself, of course, is a tikkun of the Hester of Chesan, means the original deficiency, that is removed. And the second form of tikkun, of course, is what's called kilkul, and that is the deficiency which man has caused in the Bria as a result of his chet. So therefore there are two tikkunim, or two avodas, which mankind must now engage in as a result of the chet of Adam Rishon. Now, as a result of this, I just wanted to also explain a little more in depth what is the idea of the two tikkunim. Now, the first Hester which the Rebbeinu Shalom gave is the fact that he was absent from the Bria, and the only function and power that the Sitra Achra, in the guise of the snake or the Nachash, had was that it could tempt, or it could try to tempt man to do sin, or seduce him in that sense, a mesis, to try to tempt him to do sin. But the Nachash or the Sitra Achra had no other power besides that. The Hester, or the removal of God's presence in the Bria, was God's own choice and done by his own power. It was done by no other power. As a result of the chet of Adam, what happened is that what Adam Rishon did by doing the chet is that he actually gave a power to the Nachash, the Sitra Achra. So therefore what comes out is that no more is it that the Sitra Achra merely has the power to tempt man, to try to seduce man to sin, but the Sitra Achra has now more power to actually get involved in the Bria itself, to get involved in the physical universe itself. In other words, the actual chet, it was mekalkel the Bria in two ways. First of all, it removed the presence of the Rebbeinu Shalom in general, and second, it gave power to the Nachash or the Sitra Achra, powers which he did not have before. Therefore evil became strengthened, because that's what the Sitra Achra tries to do, is promote evil. Therefore that was a second kilkul, in the sense that evil now had power which it shouldn't have in the first place, and which it never had. Now, so therefore you have two kilkulim in that sense, that God was further removed from the Bria as a result of the chet, and God's removal in the Bria, of course, means that the Sitra Achra has newfound power, and that's a second kilkul, that man actually has given power or strength to evil itself. Now, what does the Sitra Achra, of course, try to do as a result of this yenuka, this sustenance of power? He influences the physical Bria, and he does that in several ways. First of all, death and all kinds of deterioration, physical deterioration, is a result of the Sitra Achra. So in that sense, he has the power of the Bria. Also, the Sitra Achra, of course, became internalized in man's body. The Yetzer Hara now is in the psyche of man, and not external the way it was before. Because with the power given by the Sitra Achra, he now could enter and control the physical universe. Also, what the Sitra Achra can do as a result of his power, which is that he can promote individuals who choose freely to do evil. He can actually promote them in the sense that he can give them success. In other words, what he does is the Rebbeinu Shalom gives them success because of the accusations of the Sitra Achra against Klal Yisrael. So therefore, Hester itself is promoted and furthered and caused by the power of the Sitra Achra. So therefore, two kilkulim in the kilkul itself is really there. The first kilkul is the idea that there's a Hester of the Rebbeinu Shalom further than what even the Rebbeinu Shalom. And the second kilkul is that Hester itself, that the Rebbeinu Shalom is found further away from the Bria, the universe, is because the Sitra Achra himself has the power to promote events which give success to the fact that they give success to individuals who try to promote the idea that there is no Rebbeinu Shalom, that they themselves are the powers. That's ribui kochos, a multiplicity or plurality of many forces besides the Rebbeinu Shalom. So therefore, the kilkul, of course, was also in the idea that the Sitra Achra now has power. Therefore, if you now if an individual now goes to Masakin, the kilkul, the hester which is caused by the kilkul, the chet, he must deal with the sitra achra. Because the sitra achra is the one who's promoting that hester. So therefore, he has to battle or wage war with the sitra achra himself and take away that power. When the power of the sitra achra is removed, then that's the end of the hester that he causes. That's how. Since the sitra achra is the one who causes that hester as a result of the chatoim of Odom and later on the chatoim of Jews, therefore you must deal with the sitra achra and take away that power. And if you remove the enuka, that power of the sitra achra himself, then what happens is that there's no more hester as caused by man, because the one who's promoting or making sure that hester exists, of course, is the sitra achra. Therefore, one must combat the sitra achra in order to remove the hester, because the sitra achra is causing that hester. And that is done, of course, as I mentioned previously, by involving yourself with the battle of the sitra achra in one of two ways. To remain at tzaddik, even though you're within the midst or within the dominion of the sitra achra, to remain at tzaddik. Or the second way, if a person doesn't remain at tzaddik, right, which means mitzvahs and tshuva, then the second alternative is that he suffers yisurin because of the sitra achra. And now, of course, the sitra achra, of course, is represented by goyim, who basically do the will of the sitra achra. Therefore, they are seen as his agents. Therefore, the idea is that if they suffer yisurin at the hands of the sitra achra, it dissipates his power, his claim, because now he has no more claim against you. You've suffered at his hands. Therefore, once the sitra achra has no more power, then he has no more power to be masti yechudai, which is his entire objective, to provide choshech, darkness to man. And the darkness consists of the fact that there's a multiplicity of beings. That's what he always wants to promote. Therefore, as a result of the idea of contending with the sitra achra, his power is lost. Therefore, what is no more promoted, of course, is the ribui koiches, the idea that there are many authorities and powers. Elamai, the original hester, is then produced, which is that the sitra achra now only has the power to tempt man, to try to seduce man. In other words, that he's been externalized outside of the physical universe. He no more has the power in the universe itself. And of course, then the ultimate next task, of course, is to spread Kedusha and ultimately destroy even the function or the faculty of the ability of the sitra achra even to tempt man. That is finally destroyed also. This is what the entire idea of what kilkel means in more deeper understanding, and also in terms of how one engages in combat to remove that second kilkel. Now, I just want to mention one thing which is important, and that many times you'll find in a sefer, where the sefer says that the entire purpose of man's creation, is that a person has to to make the Rebbeinu Shalom king, to be mamlich HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to designate the Rebbeinu Shalom as king. This is the entire reason why the Rebbeinu Shalom created the Bria, is that man should recognize and man should make God king, of course, by his own free will. That's the union of Melech. This is what many times you'll see which is said in Sfar, but the truth is that that's really misleading. The purpose of man is not to make the Rebbeinu Shalom, rather the original purpose, the first objective of the Rebbeinu Shalom, is not that man should make him king or should recognize the kingship of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Because it sounds like the Rebbeinu Shalom, it sounds like, what does God need man to make him king? I mean, what is he? He's got to have acceptance and recognition by others, and then he'll feel good about himself. What does it mean? But the idea is that the objective of man, or rather the idea which is promoted sometimes in Sfarim, they say that the objective of the creation is that man should designate the Rebbeinu Shalom as king, to coronate the Rebbeinu Shalom through his free will. And this was the reason why the Rebbeinu Shalom created the Bria. Like I say, that's misleading. That is not the objective. The objective is that man should be neheneh, should be derive pleasure from the Rebbeinu Shalom. The objective of the Bria is hatova, that the Rebbeinu Shalom should be mative to people, that he should give them states of pleasure or states of well-being. Now, since it was decided by the Rebbeinu Shalom that that state of pleasure would be to experience the Rebbeinu Shalom himself, Therefore, which means to experience the melucha of God, which means yichudai, that's what melucha means, since it was designated by Rebbeinu Shalom that he himself would be the reward that man would experience. In other words, man would be masig yichudai or masig malchusai, that's what it means. Man would apprehend or comprehend the absolute unity of God, that malchut itself. So therefore, that was the task of man, to mamlech the Rebbeinu Shalom, to coronate God. No, so therefore that's really the second objective. The first objective is that man should experience the Rebbeinu Shalom directly, which means experience yichud shlitasoy, or the mulucha of the Rebbeinu Shalom, the kingdom of God. However, the way he does that is he has to work for it. What is his work? His work is that he actually has to recognize that the Rebbeinu Shalom is king. So therefore, what is many times spoken of as the primary purpose or objective of the Bria is really the secondary purpose, which means that's really the task. In other words, the way you can experience or comprehend the idea of the absolute unity of God, the kingdom of God, is by working and laboring to establish that kingdom, that you should perceive that kingdom. Therefore, you perceive the very kingdom you established. Midah connected midah. To the exact amount that you perceive the Rebbeinu Shalom as king in the Bria, that's the task. To that amount, you will experience or comprehend that kingdom in Olam Haba. So therefore, the first primary purpose of the Bria, in other words, the bottom line is Hatova, that the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted to be mative to the Bria, mative to Adam, to give man the ability to experience him directly, in sense of experience his melucha, his yichudai, his unity. However, the way man would do that would be to work for it in order to avoid the embarrassment that comes from getting something for nothing. And the task would be, of course, is to recognize that the Rebbeinu Shalom is king. Notice that not man is king, because man always wants to, that's the war. Is man king or God king? That man would recognize that not that he is king, but that the Rebbeinu Shalom is king, and therefore he would experience that melucha, that hasog of Yehudai, which he labored therein. And therefore it would be what's called Hatova Shlema. In other words, man would experience the Rebbeinu Shalom, the aspect of his Yehudai, without any shame or without any loss of self-respect, since he is the one who labored or worked to try to figure that out. Therefore, in that merit, he also experiences it. So therefore, the Rebbeinu Shalom is now mative. He does good to man, he bestows good upon man. Behatova Shlema means that not only does man experience God, which is the best kind of Ano, but he also experiences him without any kind of loss of self-respect, because man earned that Hasaga. This is the idea that I just wanted to mention. Now, getting back to Avram Avinu, and going a little further into Avram. The idea of Avram basically is involved in, or rather the objective or the life of Avram is really involved in several tasks, basically three. And things about Avram's life gel around these ideas. The first idea of Avram, of course, is to be the Masakin, to establish the agreement or the covenant with the Rebbeinu Shalom, that he would assume the role of Masakin, he and his descendants, which means that he and his descendants have the power to actually undo the Hester, which means that God actually subjugates his revelation or his absence in the Bria based on the actions of Jews. Goyim do not have this power at all. A Goy cannot influence the direction of God's movement, not one iota. The only thing he can influence if he does a righteous act is that he can influence his own mazel, if he gets Olam Haba or whatever. But in terms of the Bria, the universe being corrected, that God now reveals himself to the entire universe, Goyim cannot influence the Rebbeinu Shalom at all. That's the idea of what it means to be a Masakin, one who can actually Masakin the Bria. So therefore, the first primary objective of Avram is to Masakin, to be that Masakin, to be Yisrael. And that's what Yisrael is, as I previously mentioned. The second idea of the Avram, and each of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov had these designated tasks, is to personify a midah of the Rebbeinu Shalom, a fundamental midah. And in this case, the fundamental midah of the Rebbeinu Shalom is chesed, kindness, to bestow good or kindness or bestow a pleasurable state on another person. In other words, to enhance being. Now, chesed, of course, means to give that without anything in return. In other words, the individual who's getting it doesn't deserve anything. He didn't do anything to work. He didn't work for it. But chesed means, pure chesed means to give something to somebody else for no reason whatsoever than the fact that the person who's mative wants to give it. This is the idea of chesed. In other words, that Avraham Avinu, his work was to personify in his own self. This was his labor, okay? Was to personify this idea of chesed, which of course is the personification of the chesed of the Ribbono Shel Olam in the Bria. Now this, of course, is a result of ahava, of love. In other words, because chesed and ahava are really the same. Because the Ribbono Shel Olam loves the Bria, since he has a love of the Adam, and especially Jews, since they became the Masaknim, therefore he wants to bestow upon them hano, or good things in terms of chesed. Okay? So therefore, the ava, which is the motive, creates the chesed, which is the midah. Okay? And the recipients, of course, is the Masakin who labors therein, and therefore he deserves that hasaga, or that hatova that the Ribbono Shel Olam wants to give him. So therefore that was the second task of Avram, is to really to personify that chesed of the Ribbono Shel Olam. And in other words, to be a mative. Just like the Ribbono Shel Olam is a mative, that Avram should be a mative also. So therefore this was the second fundamental objective of Avram, is to give, the fundamental objective is to give, or rather to personify chesed. Personify chesed in himself. This is avodah, which personifies a fundamental midah of the Ribbono Shel Olam, which of course is chesed. Now, therefore, when you look at Avram's life, you find that he was very much concerned with bestowing goodness upon others. That was the intensity of his avodah. That was his primary move in that direction. Where do you see it? You see that Avram, the mitzvah of Hachnosas Ochem was very great to Avram, right? What is the idea of Hachnosas Ochem? To invite guests. That Avram was very much concerned with inviting guests and giving to them, which in a classic one, of course, is by Vayera, when the three Malachim were his guests. But in any case, the idea of Hachnosas Ochem was a very fundamental labor of Avram. And this comes out of the midah of chesed, which Avram was trying to personify and bring into his actual person, the union of a Merkava, to bear that chesed and to personify that chesed. In any case, so you find that in the midah of Hachnosas Ochem. Now Avram additionally, of course, wanted to use that Hachnosas Ochem also to use, try to get the person to recognize that where does all good come from, of course, the Ribbono Shel Olam. So it was also a vehicle, of course, for trying to make people from. But in any case, Hachnosas Ochem as a midah is a personification of the chesed of Avram. Now, where else do you find it? You find it by Gerim. That Avram didn't want to just keep Judaism to himself, the notion of the Ribbono Shel Olam to himself. He went out and made proselytes, Gerim. And we find that the Torah says that when Avram left Choran in Lech Lecha, Parshas Lech Lecha, when he left the city of Choran, it says that he took many things with him. And it says also that he took the nefesh, the nefashis, the souls that he made in Choran. So the Chazal say that, what does that mean? That Avram was Megaya, the men, and Sarah was Megayeres, the women. In other words, that they occupied themselves with not only keeping the good things that you have, the treasure that you have to yourself, but spreading the wealth, bringing it to other people also. That also is an idea of chesed, to bring it to others also. So this is the idea of Gerim. Again, we find the interesting stage of Avram, or rather the facet of Avram, who concerned himself, of course, basically with chesed, is by the idea of Yishmael and Hagar. And that was that after Yitzchak was born, then Hagar observed Yishmael was mitzachek, the Torah says. He was playing. So Chazal learned that playing means that he was either Isaac in Avodah Zarah, he was Isaac in some kind of chet or sin. So she told Avram that to send Hagar and Yishmael away, send them away, because they will not inherit with Yitzchak b'ni. That's what she said. So the truth is that one has to understand that very, very carefully. People learn, if you learn it superficially, it sounds like that Sarah was jealous of the fact that Yishmael, of course, was older, and she didn't want Yishmael, who was not her son, inheriting the wealth of Avram. She wanted Yitzchak to do that because that was her son. So therefore she told Avram, look, get rid of them, So it sounds like there was like a competition, it was jealousy. I don't want him to inherit, I want my son to inherit. And the Torah says that Avram, it was a very bad gesture in the eyes of Avram. Avram disagreed very much with Sarah. And the Rebbeinu Shalom appeared to Avram and said, listen to what Sarah says, what she's saying is correct. So if we're talking, if the idea of what Sarah had to offer is something, a base motive, a motive only in the sense of, look, I don't want him to inherit my wealth, the family's wealth, I want Yitzchak to inherit the wealth, and if Yishmael remains, he's going to say he's older, therefore he's entitled, so get rid of them. Obviously, if that was the motive, the Rebbeinu would not have told Avram, listen to Sarah, for she's correct. What Sarah saw, B'nevuah, and this is important to understand, because it deals with the chesed of Avram. What Sarah saw b'nevuah is that, of course, in Yitzchak, the Yerusha, the inheritance of Klal Yisrael would continue. Sarah is not only concerned with the inheritance of Klal Yisrael in terms of the physical possessions of Avram, because money is here today and gone tomorrow. The main idea is that Yitzchak was the second generation, or the descendant of Avram, who would become the Mesaken, the one who could correct the Bria. That was the main avodah, the main merkava of the Rebbeinu Shalom would be Yitzchak, not Yishmael. And she saw that because she saw Yishmael being Metzachik. See, besides the fact that, how do we know, besides the fact that the Rebbeinu Shalom said to listen to Sarah, so we know that Avram, that it cannot be a base motive that was Sarah's intention. It says also distinctly that the reason why she said that to Avram was because she saw Yishmael being Metzachik, playing, which Chazal say he was either Isaac in some kind of avodah zarah or some other chatoim, whatever. So therefore, and then she said, send him away because I don't want him to inherit with my son. So therefore, what motivated Sarah was because she saw that Yitzchak would be the one who would inherit the spiritual Yerusha of Avram, which is the ability to be Mesaken, the whole tafkid of the Bria, the whole purpose of creation. And she saw that Yishmael, who was in a great state spiritually, Yishmael wasn't a regular person. Any son of Avram is not a plain person, obviously. But Yishmael was nowhere near what Yitzchak obviously was. So therefore she was afraid that Yishmael would have a bad hashpah, ruchnistig-wise, spiritually, on Yitzchak. And therefore Yitzchak would not fulfill his tafkid, which is the main tafkid of the Bria. So therefore she said, send them away. Send them away. Send Hagar and her son away, because I'm afraid that even though Yishmael does have a madrega, but since he's involved in chatoim, he's not perfect, he's going to have a blemish on Yitzchak, and the main idea, of course, of the tikkun is through Yitzchak, and that's the whole purpose of the Bria. Avram, however, felt, because of his chesed, that he didn't want to drive Yishmael away, because he felt that Yitzchak would be able to withstand the temptations that Yishmael, the older brother, half-brother, would give him. But what Sarah felt is that she doesn't want any energies to be diverted to withstand Yishmael's sort of like engagements with Chatoim. But Avram, because he was an unbounded chesed, he didn't want to send Yishmael away. He wanted to give his goodness, which is the Yerusha of Ruchnius, to Yishmael also. Let him also benefit, because he figured maybe he can try to change Yishmael, that he wouldn't be such a chote on his madrega. So therefore, because Avram was chesed, which was unbounded, wasn't restricted or limited, therefore Avram felt that he wants to give he wants to let Yishmael remain in his house, so therefore perhaps he can influence Yishmael. Yitzchak may be endangered, but he felt that Yitzchak won't be endangered because fourth, Avram would make sure. But Sarah said, even if he's not in danger, but fourth, Yitzchak has to use energies to keep away or make sure that Yishmael doesn't corrupt him. And that energies could be used for further growth in Ruchnius. So therefore, that was the machlokes between Avram and Sarah. So therefore, the Rebbeinu Shalom says, listen to Sarah because she is correct. Since the tikkun has to come through Yitzchak, he is the Yerusha of the tikkun. Therefore, all energies, of course, of Yitzchak have to be devoted in terms of aliyah. Not he has to fight off the sitra achra or whatever, especially as a child. And this is what the Rebbe Shem told Avram. So therefore, and that's what Sarah said, that since Yishmael is not going to, he's not going to inherit the tikkun. If Yishmael would also inherit the tikkun besides Yitzchak, so okay, then you have to work with him also. You can't send him out. But if the whole one who's going to inherit the tikkun of the bria, to masakin the bria, is Yitzchak, then you cannot jeopardize in any way, even by diminishing the strength or energies of Yitzchak, you can't diminish that tikkun or that purpose in the bria. So therefore you must send him away. This is what she said. That's what it means, that she saw him playing, so she realized that he would be a bad influence on Yitzchak. So she said that he's not going to inherit with my son, therefore send him away. Which means that if he would inherit, then I have to keep him. Since he's not going to inherit, since Yitzchak will be the masakin of the bria, therefore you cannot allow any possible jeopardy to come into Yitzchak. But Avram, because he had unbounded chesed, didn't want to do that. But who did the Rebbeinu Shalom say was correct? Sarah was correct. Okay? Now, therefore we see again the idea of chesed of Avram, even to the extent where there's no restrictions. That was a chesed in Avram. Because chesed cannot be unbounded. It has to be bounded or limited. It has to be restricted in terms of the correct chesed. And where do we find that the Rebbeinu Shalom taught Avram that lesson? By the Akedah. What was the Akedah? What was the test of Avram? What was the weak spot? Why did the Rebbeinu Shalom pick the Akedah as the greatest nisayon of Avram? Because the truth is that what the Rebbeinu Shalom commanded Avram was a weak spot. Not only was it a weak spot because anybody, if the Rebbeinu Shalom tells any man to slaughter his son, I mean that's obviously a weak spot. It's a horrendous, abominable act. Such an act, and Adrabah, the Rebbeinu Shalom castigates the Ummah Ha'olam because they offer their sons, their children to Molech. The Rebbeinu Shalom says himself. But, so objectively, of course, it's wrong to do that. But, so therefore, it's that itself ensures a difficulty to Avram's Bechina, to Avram's Nisayon. But what doubly was difficult for Avram is the biggest Baal Chesed around. He is the one who doesn't want to destroy anybody. On the contrary, to be mative as much as possible. So madach to everybody else, he had achnosas orcham, gerem to give hatova to Yishmael, even at the jeopardy of Yitzchak. His alachas kama that Avram is really going to be difficult to sacrifice his son. That's a double weak spot to Avram, because he was the quintessence or personification of chesed, of doing good to a person. And ending a person's life is, of course, the greatest evil. So the Rebbeinu Shalom, of course, knowing this, used the nisayon in Avram's weak spot. Okay, and that was the nisayon to Avram. So of course Avram listened, and he was about to shecht. So therefore Avram, what was the idea or the Musa Haskel? What did the Rebbeinu Shalom teach Avram? What the Rebbeinu Shalom revealed to Avram is that chesed must have a restriction. There's no such thing as an unbounded chesed. In this world, there is a bounded chesed. Therefore, Avram has to bind his chesed when it conflicts with the ratzon of the Rebbeinu Shalom. In other words, what determines when you are about chesed is not the attribute of chesed, it's the will of God. The chesed, the mid of chesed, must be bounded by the ratzon Hashem. This is what Avram perceived from the Akedah. In other words, that chesed must have din. Therefore, as a result of the fact that he withstood that nisayon, that he would have killed his son, Yitzchak, however the Rebbeinu Shalom stopped him, what it did is enabled Avram to grow by that nisayon, where he would now personify chesed with a measure of din also. So what the Rebbeinu Shalom was doing was really enabling him to personify true chesed, which means chesed with din, because in this world chesed always comes with din. In other words, so therefore the nisayon was to Avram, because Avram had that double weakness, not only not killing a son, but he was the personification of chesed itself. Okay, and what the Rebbeinu Shalom was megala to him through this nisayon is that ratzon Hashem is what decides what chesed is, not the midah of chesed itself, or not the human intellect. Therefore, when Avram realized that, it enabled Avram to what? To personify his chesed through the attribute also of din. In other words, that chesed must be subjugated or modified or tempered by din, which of course is the Ratzon Hashem. What is din? Din means that there's a limitation or a restriction on chesed. And you may ask, why is chesed tempered by din? Because the Rebbeinu Shalom, in his attribute of chesed himself, tempers it with din. Why? Because if the Rebbeinu Shalom would be meitiv, bechazdoi completely, then there would be no ilam hazeh. There would be no ilam hazeh, just ilam haba. Why did God create ilam hazeh? Which is din, means you got to work for the reward, because of namdik sufa. In order to masakin, to correct the feeling of self-respect, loss of self-respect that a person would have, that embarrassment, therefore a man must work for his reward. Therefore we see that the chesed that the Rebbeinu gives to an Adam, of course, which is the fact that an individual has the opportunity to earn reward in the first place, is the chesed, but it must go through the vehicle or through the concept of din, which means that he has to work for it. So it comes out that the reality is what? That chesed must have din. That's what the Rebbeinu himself subjugated his own actions, that his chesed is subjugated to the actions of din in order to have a tikkun of namdik sufa. Therefore, he gave Avram the last nisoyim that the chesed itself must be subjugated to din. Therefore, this was the idea of the Akedah. Because one of the second primary idea that Avram was doing was to personify that fundamental midah of chesed of the Rebbeinu Shalom. But again, it had to be personified through a certain measure of din, and this was the vehicle that the Akedah enabled Avram to do. Therefore, therefore, before the Akedah, by Hagar, that's why Avram Avinu wanted to keep Yishmael, because he had unbounded chesed. Chesed cannot be unbounded. It has to have a certain limits. And the limits, of course, is that if Yitzchak is going to be hampered in his approach to the tikkun, you can't do that. So Sarah understood that, but Avram, because of his incredible chesed, perceived the chesed purely as a hatova, which is unbounded, means unrestricted love. And the Rebbeinu Shalom showed him that, nay, it can't be. So therefore, the Rebbeinu Shalom, like they say, Lishitase, just like he agreed with Sarah that the chesed has to be bounded in terms of din, or it has to be bounded with a restriction, limit, the same idea is the Akedah, it has to be bounded also. In any case, this is the idea of the midah that Avram worked on, which was chesed, which of course later on was indicated to him that it has to be bounded or restricted or limited through the idea of a din. And this was revealed to him, of course, in the Akedah. I just want to mention that, Yishmael was a very great person, and the proof of that is that you have Tanoim who are named after Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael Oimer, Torah Nidreshes B'Shloishes B'Yud Gimel Midas, the Bryce of Rabbi Yishmael. So how can a Tana be named after a Rasha? You don't hear anybody named Rabbi Esav. Yeah. The idea is that Yishmael was a tzaddik. Why? Because the Chazal bring around that he was a tzaddik, because when it says that Yitzchak and Yishmael went to bury Avram, Yitzchak came first, then it says Yishmael. So therefore that's the raya that Yishmael allowed Yitzchak to come first, because he perceived Yitzchak as a tzaddik, which means he perceived what Tzidkus is. That was the raya that Yishmael did tshuva, that he was a tzaddik, and therefore you can have Tanoim who are named Rabbi Yishmael and Kohen Gadol. I mean, you can never have that unless he was a tzaddik. So therefore, getting back to Avram, this was the second major task of Avram, of course, was to personify chesed, which is a fundamental attribute, a midah of the Rebbeinu Shalom, and chesed came first. Chesed olam yibona means the world was created first with chesed, and then it was subjugated or was modified by din. That's why din came second. So therefore Avram, who was the first he was of course chesed, and Yitzchak will be din, as we shall see. But in any case, this was the second fundamental objective of Avram, was that his avodah should be in terms of the area called chesed. That was the intensity of his avodah, which is to bestow goodness upon others, which of course basically is the Torah and the knowledge of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Now, The third major objective, of course, as a result of the chesed, is the hispashtus kedusha. Now it's the tikkun, or the avodah, the work of being mispashit kedusha, spreading holiness, which of course means the knowledge of God, was the fundamental purpose and objective of Avraham Avinu. As such, we see that Avraham Avinu was the Mashiach ben David. He was a shiur of the Mashiach ben David, which of course now makes sense. He was mamash the shiur of Mashiach ben David. Therefore, he was involved in his hispashtus kedusha. That's the to spread the knowledge of God throughout the Bria. That was his basic involvement, of course, which was founded upon the fact that he was personifying the fundamental midah of chesed. And so these are the three kind of ideas in Avram. The first idea is the fact that Avram was the one to initiate the agreement with God, and he and his descendants, of course, would take upon that burden to be the Masakim. The second idea is that Avram would personify the midah of chesed, and the third idea is that Avram would also, of course, be involved in the repercussions of chesed, which of course is hispashtus kedusha, which of course is the work of the Mashiach ben David. And this, of course, was because Avraham Avinu was a shiur of the Mashiach ben David. Now, I also I wanted to mention that until now we see that some of the nisyonos of Avraham were directed against the midah of Avraham, which is chesed, kindness, and that the Rebbeinu Shalom tested him in respect to that midah, that attribute of kindness, which Avraham exemplified. In other words, his life was basically revolved around the emphasis of personifying chesed, and I'll talk about that further in detail later. But in any case, that some of the nisyonos were directed at that midah, and I previously mentioned Yishmael, how that was a conflict, and also the Akedah, how both of these were conflicts in the chesed of Avram. We find also another place in Sodom, which is also very important for us to see, and that is that we have to, the question arises, why did the Rebbeinu Shalom tell Avram that he was going to destroy Sodom? And the idea to that, I mean, many ideas, but one of the basic ideas is because the Rebbeinu Shalom was again testing Avram in the midah of chesed. In other words, what would he do chesed for Rishoim? In other words, would he interact to save Rishoim from also ibud, from destruction? In other words, how far does the chesed of Avram extend? How far does it encompass? What does it include? Would Avram also pray for Rishoim, even though those who clearly deserve to die? Would his chesed also extend to praying for Achmanis to the Rebbeinu Shalom himself? This was the reason why the Rebbeinu Shalom told Avram, because it was an isoyin for Avram. He was testing him to what extent would he extend himself in terms of his chesed to save the people of Sodom. Memela, therefore, he told him. And in that case, we see that what he wanted from Avram is to see how far he would extend the chesed, not how far he would limit or control it, which is what the Rebbeinu Shalom did by the Akedah and also by the incident of Yishmael and Hagar. There we see the notion of control or limiting chesed. Here we see what the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted is to what extent Avram would, of course, extend the chesed. This is the idea in Sodom. Now, of course, that encompassed difficulties because would Avram question the judgment, the chesed and the rachmanis of the Rebbeinu Shalom? Because if the Rebbeinu Shalom tells Avram that he's going to destroy Sodom, right, what does that indicate? That God has decided, even notwithstanding the chesed of the Rebbeinu Shalom, the kindness and the mercy, he has decided that the people of Sodom deserve to be destroyed. So therefore it was a tremendous risk for Avram to figure out that the reason why the Rebbeinu Shalom is telling him in the first place is to see if he would come to their aid. That was what Avram had to figure out. And therefore, what the risk involved was that he actually would make himself look like a greater chassid, like a greater tzaddik or Baal Rachmanis, by interceding for a people who had to be destroyed after the Rebbeinu Shalom himself says he wants to destroy them. But Avram successfully understood that the reason why the Rebbeinu Shalom is telling him this is that he should see that the Rebbeinu Shalom wants him to intercede for these Rishonim. And it's like Moshe Rabbeinu, when the Rebbeinu said to Moshe Rabbeinu, leave me up so I may destroy this nation, what Moshe Rabbeinu was supposed to understand, and which he correctly understood, is the Rebbeinu wanted Moshe to intercede for Klal Yisrael by the mice of the Egel, when the Jews did the sin of the Egel. And of course Moshe understood that the way the Rebbeinu expressed himself, leave me and let me destroy these people, which means if you don't leave me, I'm not going to destroy them. So he understood that that itself was an sign to Moshe to see what kind of leader he was. To what extent is he dedicated to his people? To what extent would he go to combat for his people, even though it meant a risk? Because, I mean, look who you're arguing. You argue with the Rebbeinu Shalom, who wants to destroy Klal Yisrael. But in reality, it was a test for Moshe Rabbeinu. To what extent would he come across as a leader? How devoted was he? What kind of faithful shepherd was he? And of course, Moshe Rabbeinu withstood the test, and he disregarded the notion that he become a nation unto himself, which is Rebbeinu said to him, that I'll make you a nation. And he said, nay, save Klal Yisrael. Because Moshe Rabbeinu knew that the entire Tachlis of the Bria, of course, is only Klal Yisrael, and he was that leader, of course, who loved Klal Yisrael. The same idea with Avram, that Avram successfully understood that he had to intercede for these people. But even Avram, who interceded for them, knew that he couldn't say to the Rebbeinu, save them because the people of Sodom themselves. He told them, save them because maybe there are 50 tzaddikim in the city. Maybe they can somehow help the people of Sodom to change their ways. So even his approach, of course, wasn't that you should save Sodom because of their merit. They had none. But maybe because of tzaddikim in the city, they deserve to be saved. Therefore, this Nisayon also was a test to see to what extent will Avram extend his chesed. Just to review what we had covered very rapidly, in terms of Avram, we see that Avram basically is involved in basically three different kinds of essential tasks. And the first one is the fact that he served as an initiator. He was the one who brought in the fact that he was going to be a Masakin and all his descendants. In other words, that he was going to correct the status of the universe in terms of the amount of the presence of the Rebbeinu Shalom that had in there or not. This is what the idea of Avram, that he was the one who initiated the agreement with the Rebbeinu Shalom for him and his descendants. This, of course, is symbolized by the bris, which is the exact agreement or covenant that Avram entered in with the Rebbeinu Shalom. The second idea is that Avram Avinu personified chesed of the Rebbeinu Shalom, and I'll get into that more extensively later. Why is this necessary? But in any case, and what does this mean? But in any case, the second major thread or theme of Avram's life is this constant personification of the chesed of the Rebbeinu Shalom. And of course, he actualized that. And this was, of course, the main avodah that Avram had. And as a third avodah was, of course, to be involved in the repercussions or the expressions of that chesed, and that is his pashtus kedusha, to spread the name of the Rebbeinu Shalom throughout the Bria, to make people aware that there is a God, and that this God is, of course, absolute in authority, is the absolute ruler, and the absolute king. So therefore that was his pashtus kedusha, which means to spread the kedusha or the knowledge of the Rebbeinu Shalom throughout the Bria. And as such, I mentioned previously, that is the task of the Mashiach ben David, and that's what Avram Avinu was. He was a shirish of the Mashiach ben David. Now, this is basically the idea in terms of what Avram was involved in. In addition, we see that the Nisyonis, the tests of Avram, basically were centering itself around his attribute of chesed, always testing him. In other words, that and I mentioned that the purpose of a test is that the individual who's being tested should be able to perfect that midah which the Rebbeinu Shalom wants him to perfect. And he does that through a test. In any case, that these tests revolve themselves around the chesed of Avram, in terms of what Avram understand that you have to limit or restrict chesed or kindness, or to what extent would Avram extend this chesed that he has. Therefore, this is basically, to sum up, the essential ideas of Avram Avinu. Now, it's important to understand that one can talk on and on, one can learn Torah for years and talk on and on, just in Avram, the significance of the entire ideas of Avram for, of course, a great deal of time. The purpose here, of course, is not to talk about each portion of the Chumash in entirety, because this, of course, is not the purpose, but rather to talk about the essential ideas in terms of the internal script. What the essential idea of what's going on. And as such, I had dealt with previous ideas between Adam and Cain and Hevel and Moshe Rabbeinu and Yosef and Yehud and so on, and now I'm dealing with the Avos. And I had spent time on Avram Avinu, trying to point out the essential ideas that Avram was involved with, the internal script of what's going on, that we can understand the life of Avram. And the same idea, Yitzchak and Yaakov, I'm also going to be trying to also develop the essential ideas behind each of. And therefore, of course, I'm not going into many side peripheral ideas and Musar arguments and other. For that, you can look in other places. In other words, what I want to do is just mention an organizing idea, which I think is very important to know. And that is that this shiur has two objectives. And that's what probably makes it different from other kinds of shurim that also deal with hashkafa. And that is, the first objective is to reveal the internal or the central theme or script of the Bria. In other words, the internal design, that when the Rebbeinu Shem created the universe, exactly what was this design, and therefore to reveal this internal script, which basically many times is only alluded to in the Torah, remez. So therefore, this shiur really approaches Torah al-pi remez, according to allusions of what the internal script, what the central theme of the Torah is. And sometimes the Torah says it more openly, more clearly. That's usually really. But the idea is to reveal this internal script of the Torah, which is basically alluded many times. That's the first objective of this shiur. So we deal with internals, or hidden ideas, or internal designs or concepts. The second objective of the shiur is to demonstrate, to indicate that all events of Tanakh, all events of Jewish history, all events of world history, all halachas, and the agoda of Chazal and Gemara are nothing more than expressions, they're nothing more than reflections or manifestations of this internal hashkafa framework which we're going into. They're nothing more than the expressions of the hidden design of creation. So therefore, as such, we've explored for quite a while the framework itself in its internal perspective, what the structure and the concepts of hashkafa is, and what we're doing now is to express the Torah and the history of mankind in terms of that framework. And that's what I'm devoting myself now to, the idea of Jewish history. And we're going in terms of that, in terms of Torah. What the true theme of Torah is, what is really going on underneath the apparent superficial story in terms of what we see. What really determines the behavior of the Avos? What was the conflict of Avos, Moshe Rabbeinu, and Klal Yisrael in the Midbar? What was really going on? And of course also in Tanakh, also why does history, of course, take this path? How does it illustrate the internal structure and the concept of hashkafa? This is what this is the second objective of these shiurim. Now, we've begun, of course, to realize a very interesting idea, that the concept of Mashiach is not just two people who are going to come in at the end of time and save the Jews and bring revelation of the Rebbeinu Shalom to all mankind. That's not what the inner depths of the Mashiach is. But what we begin to realize is that the concept of Mashiach, it's not people, it's really an idea, a concept that is really central. It's a hidden theme of all events of mankind, which eventually culminate and finalize itself into two different individuals who finally come at the end. In other words, two individuals finally personify the two fundamental tasks that have been going on in Jewish history, to two tasks that have been assumed by the Avos, by Klal Yisrael, and the attempts that have been made to masakin or to achieve those two tasks. and finally, of course, is personified in two individuals at the end of time. This is what we begin to realize is the real internal theme of history, whether it be Jewish history, whether it be world history. And of course, this is also the theme or the internal theme of Chumash Tanakh itself. And we've seen so far how it's manifested itself in Adam Rishon, Cain and Hevel, Moshe Rabbeinu, with the Yidden in Mitzrayim, Yosef and Yehuda, and now we're seeing how it's manifested, of course, in the Ovis itself. So that's just an organizing statement, that this basically is the objectives of the shiur. In addition, in other words, this is what we're trying to accomplish, and what we see now, that the fundamental script is really the ideas of the Mashiach, which is those two ideas, those two tikkunim that are being done constantly by Klal Yisrael. That's an organizing statement. Now, to continue. Before we go into Yitzchak, who's the next of, I really have to give a certain Hagdama. Just like I did previously, after I talked a little about the concept of Mashiach, I also gave a framework, a structural framework in terms of what the structure of the Mashiach are spiritually, in Ruchnius. One really has to understand certain ideas in terms of the Ovos before one can really understand what specifically is going on in the life of the Ovos. Now, in order to do that, it's important for us to understand what are the concepts and what's the structure which is really personified by the Ribbono Shel Olam, not by the Ovos. What is the nature and the attributes of the Ribbono Shel Olam? What are the concepts that we understand about the Ribbono Shel Olam in terms of his attributes, and how are these structured? Once we understand that, we begin to see that the Ovos are nothing more than individuals who are embodying those attributes, and that is their tafkid. That's why there's such a tremendous stress placed on the Chesed of Avram, right? The Gevurah, the strength of Yitzchak, and the Tiferes, the beauty of Yaakov. That's why there's so much stress placed on these attributes, and why so much is going on in the life of the Ovos in order to perfect and to purify these attributes in their lives. Because the truth is that these attributes are nothing more than the attributes of the Ribbono Shel Olam himself. And it is the task of the Ovos, of course, to begin to personify. So therefore, we really have to understand something about the concepts and the structure of these attributes which are personified by the Ribbono Shel Olam. Now, since the Ovos are the chariot of the Ribbono Shel Olam, if you recall, and therefore they bear God, they bear them like a chariot bears its rider, and they bear the Ribbono Shel Olam. This is their purpose, to bear the Ribbono Shel Olam, as I mentioned previously, the entire idea of the Merkava. Therefore, they must personify these concepts and structure of the Ribbono Shel Olam himself. That is what the chariot does. The chariot bears the driver. The Ovos bear, they carry the Ribbono Shel Olam, which means that they personify the midas of the Ribbono Shel Olam. Now, when we look at that, what is then the essential avoid of the Ovos? The essential avoidus of the essential avoid of the Ovos are basically two, although there was a third one added on. The first basic avodah of each patriarch, each of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and subsequently all Klal Yisrael, is to reveal the fact that the Ribbono Shel Olam is a melech, a king, an odoin, a master. He is the supreme authority, the supreme ruler of the Bria. That everything is absolutely in his control. That is the concept which I mentioned previously of Yichud Shlitosoi, that God rulership, his authority is absolute. This is the first tafkid of the Ovos, to reveal that to the Bria, that the Ribbono Shel Olam is a melech, an odoin, a master. The second tafkid of the Ovos is what's called lihidamis bidrochov. There's a mitzvah in the Torah that says that you have to be medama to the Ribbono Shel Olam. Just like the Ribbono Shel Olam is a racham, a merciful, compassionate being, so you also must be merciful and compassionate. Just like he is a Chanun, he is gracious, so you also must be gracious, and so on. The entire 13 attributes. Therefore, that's the mitzvah of Lidamas B'Drochov. From there, Lidamas B'Drochov means to imitate his ways, to copy his derech, his ways. That's a mitzvah in the Torah, which the Rambam includes as one of the Taryag mitzvahs, as one of the 613 mitzvahs. The idea of embodying or personifying the midas or the attributes of God, of course, is what the Avos were concerned with as a second major idea. That not only did they want to reveal the Rebbeinu Shalom as a melech, as a king of creation, but also to actually resemble, to become to imitate the Rebbeinu Shalom, to use the Rebbeinu Shalom as a model for what man should look like. And that actually all the ideas of Musa, the idea of Musa where you have to be a chesed and have all the midas, really comes from that mitzvah of Lidamas B'Drochov. All the Musa shmuzin that you hear, that you have to be good, you have to be a toiv and a chesed and give tzedakah, all of these are really the midas of the Rebbeinu Shalom, and which the Rebbeinu Shalom himself commands Jews to duplicate, to imitate, in the midst of Lidamas B'Drochov. But in any case, the fundamental, the second major task of the Avos was to resemble the Rebbeinu Shalom. And therefore each of took a different midah of the Rebbeinu Shalom. And there are three fundamental ones. And each of took one, which I'll get into later, what each one took and what does that mean. But this is a second idea or major idea of the Avos. Now of course, there was two additional things that happened in addition to this. Besides the fact that each of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, besides the fact that each of revealed the Rebbeinu Shalom in creation as a melech, an Odoin, a king, and besides the fact that each of personified were medama to the Rebbeinu Shalom in one of the essential attributes, there also was Avraham and Yaakov took on two additional burdens, not Yitzchak. What was the burden? That Avraham initiated the concept of Yisrael, right? Where he became the first individual who could misaken the Bria after it was taken away from, or rather after Adam, and after the 20 generations refused to accept it. Therefore he initiated the agreement with the Rebbeinu Shalom that he would be the ones who would be justified, in which creation would be justified. In other words, that he would work to bring the Rebbeinu Shalom back into the Bria, to proclaim him throughout, to masaken the Cheson and the Kilkul, which I had mentioned previously. That was his task. Besides imitating the Rebbeinu Shalom, he also initiated the entire concept of Yisrael in terms of he and his descendants. So that was Avram. He initiated. The Yaakov also took on a third burden, and that was he finalized the concept of Yisrael. Avram initiated it, and that's why he had the bris and so on. Yaakov finalized that, and therefore he was called Yisrael. He was called Israel, because he finalized the midah, or rather the concept of Yisrael. So that was a third burden that Yaakov took on. And as a result of these two burdens, of course, new things happened in their lives. Remember, the whole lives of the Avos were nothing more than to bring out these ideas, to proclaim the Rebbeinu Shalom as a melech, to resemble the Rebbeinu Shalom in his midas, and between Avram and Yaakov to initiate the concept of Yisrael and to finalize the concept of Yisrael. And therefore, of course, Yaakov was called Yisrael. That was the two additional burdens that both Avram and Yaakov took on, besides the two previously. In addition, there was the fourth idea, which really is an idea that emanates from the Lidamas B'Drochov. And that is that they took on the jobs of the Tikkunim, which means the job of Mashiach ben Yosef and the job of Mashiach ben David. In other words, they exemplified in actions the actual Tikkunim that was going on in the Bria. For instance, Avram was the Shirish of the Mashiach ben David, Yitzchak was the Shirish of the Mashiach ben Yosef, and Yaakov originally was ben David, and then he became both after Esav lost it, which I'll get into when we get into Yaakov and Esav. However, each one then was a shirish mamish of the Mashiachin, because they were involved in those avodas that the Mashiachin have to be involved in. Basically contending with the Sitra Achra, fighting the Yetzer Hara and remaining at tzaddik. And the second kind of avodah is to spread kedusha throughout. And I'll get more into that when we talk about Yitzchak and especially Yaakov, when you really see it manifested throughout the Chumash. And we see that the theme of the Chumash, that many kashas are answered by understanding the internal script of what's going on. In any case, these are basically the tasks of the Ovos. 1, to proclaim the Rebbeinu Shalom as Melech. 2, lihidamas b'drochov, his fundamental attributes. 3 was the initiation and the finalization concept of Avram and Yaakov, which was not shared by Yitzchak. And then 4th was the personification of those attributes in terms of the Mashiach, which of course all 3 of us were involved in. That is basically the understanding of what's going on with the Ovos. And therefore, when you look at Chumash, you'll see that all the Maisim are basically to deal with one of these areas, to bring out these tafkidim, these purposes or charges, these tasks of the Ovos. It's very important to understand in dealing with the Ovos. Now, basically, once we understand that, we can go back into the Ovos and to see these things reflected. However, I want to mention a very important idea, which I had mentioned a long time ago, but I want to again mention it. That it is a mistake to assume, although it sounds very strange, but it's very important to understand that when we say the Rebbeinu Shalom is toiv, when we talk about the midas of the Rebbeinu Shalom, okay, his attributes, that he is good and kind and so on, it does not mean when we say that about a man, that a man is good, he's kind, he's long-suffering and so on. It doesn't mean the same. When we talk about that, when we refer that in terms of a human being, the human being truly has those urges and feelings in him, compassion, graciousness, kindness, strength, and so on. These things are truly exhibited and manifested in a person. They truly exist internally. And a person acts upon those urges and feelings, and therefore he exhibits chesed, rachmanos, and so on. When we talk about the Rebbeinu Shalom as having those, we must understand that these concepts are created concepts. In other words, before the universe existed, these concepts did not exist. Therefore, when we talk about the Rebbeinu Shalom bi'atzmusoi, who he truly is in terms of his essence, we don't know. The Rebbeinu Shalom is not the same toiv as an Adam. The Rebbeinu Shalom assumes the attribute of goodness, and therefore the Rebbeinu Shalom has that attribute, and he's always good, and he is quintessentially good. Means he has the totality of the concept called goodness. Again, when we say the Rebbeinu Shalom has an attribute like chesed, it means that God is truly about chesed, 1, that he is the quintessential idea of chesed, means kindness, which means that he is the totality of the concept. He embodies the totality of the concept of chesed, okay? And that he performs the midah of chesed always. Because it says, Toiv Hashem lakol, v'rachma kol ma'asav, right? It's always, he's good to all, and he's always righteous. That's why it says, Sadik Hashem b'chol drochov, v'chosed b'chol ma'asav. God never stops being a chosed, he never stops being a tzaddik. However, these midas are nivroim, they're created concepts. Means who the Rebbeinu Shalom really is, we don't know. But as far as mankind is concerned, as far as the Bria is concerned, the Rebbeinu Shalom is or has these midas. And that's the way he relates to us consistently and always will relate to us. And that is the way we have to adopt. We must imitate these attributes. But when I talk about these attributes, it doesn't mean biatzmusah. And the one who told us this, of course, is Yeshaya Hanavi, when he said the pasuk V'elmit damyuni v'eshver. The Rebbeinu Shalom says through Yeshaya the prophet, who are you going to compare me like? And I will be similar. Yoma Kodosh, says the Holy One. And I had mentioned previously that what the Rebbeinu Shalom is saying, there's nothing you could say about me and I will be it. There's no simulation, there's no similarity. There's no comparison you can make whatsoever to the Rebbeinu Shalom. You cannot say, that man is a kind man, therefore God is also a kind being. Be'etzem, in his essence. You can't do that. Because there is nothing that can compare to the Rebbeinu Shalom in terms of what he really is. And Yeshaya says that, and that's why it says Yom HaKodesh, says the Holy One. God, when God uses His name, what Shem does God use? The Holy One, Kedusha. And the concept of Kedusha means to be separate or above everything. Therefore, the Rebbeinu Shalom, who is above everything, which means all the concepts of this universe, because He created them, He says, who are you going to compare me like? I am not at all like my creation. It's merely a creation. That is a fundamental idea that I wanted to express. Many people make mistakes in that. You see it Keseda in Sforum or different, and I've seen this, that they say that this is essentially the Rebbeinu Shalom. It's not. Bi'atzmusoi lo nuida klal. We do not know what the Rebbeinu Shalom is essentially. We know how He reveals Himself to us. The guise, the clothing, how He appears to us. And the way He appears to us, of course, is the Yud Gimel Midas, the 13 divine attributes. And as far as we are concerned, this is what the Rebbeinu Shalom is, and therefore we must imitate that. Now, therefore, once we understand this, that's just important to understand the difference between God, who He really is, and what is really in terms of His created or revealed aspect of creation. Now, so therefore that's the idea. The others are occupied in these tasks to proclaim Him Melech, to lidamas bidrochov, to imitate Him, and therefore, well, we'll see what that means in a minute, and also to do the tasks of the Mashiach, which is the avodah of Klal Yisrael, and that's why they picked, because of their schus and so on. And of course also by Avraham and Yaakov, that they had these additional tasks of initiating and finalize the concept of Jew, of Yisrael. Okay, now to go further. As a result of the Ovos, not only are the Ovos the Merkava, but the truth is all Yisrael is the Merkava. All Jews, every person who's a Jew is a Merkava, a chariot. And I had gone into previously what that means. In other words, every Jew bears the responsibility of bearing God. That's what his job is. He carries the Rebbeinu Shalom. In other words, he carries him into the Bria where God was absent from. And if you recall, the purpose of a chariot is to bring the driver to his destination. So therefore, all Jews are chariots, right? And they bear the Rebbeinu Shalom in those two ways. One is that they proclaim His majesty. They indicate, they promote the fact that the Rebbeinu Shalom is king of the Bria, that He is Melech Malchei HaMelachim. And they also bear God by literally resembling that king. They mamish lihidamas bidrochov. They imitate His ways. They adopt or personify or embody His attributes. Those are the twofold tasks of the Jews. Now, in addition, of course, the Merkava eventually brings God to His destination, and that is the Tikkunim. You see? So therefore you have the three ideas. One is to proclaim God, to resemble Him, and that is the Merkava, the chariot. And then eventually what happens is that the Bria is Niskan. The Bria is corrected. The deficiency is removed. Both the chesaron and the kilkel, both the deficiency and the damage. And therefore God then becomes present in the universe as a result of the fact that you are His chariot. This is the idea. And therefore the Ovos, what they were doing is implanting not only the covenant, the agreement, which Avraham and Yaakov were involved with, but also implanting the tasks of the attributes of the Rebbeinu Shalom, and also the fact of the two avodas, the tikkunim of the Rebbeinu Shalom. And this is what the Ovos were involved with, and of course also to proclaim Him Melech, and they were implanting it in their shirish, in their root, in their neshama. And their neshama, of course, is the neshama of Klal Yisrael. The neshama of the Ovos is really the neshama of Klal Yisrael, split many times. And therefore, the idea is that, that's why the idea that Avram is really a Gilgal of Odom Rishon. But in any case, the idea is that we, Klal Yisrael, has all the different if you put all Klal Yisrael together, they would be the Avos. So therefore, the Avos implanted in their own neshama the tendencies toward all these attributes and tasks, and that was given, of course, to Klal Yisrael, and therefore Klal Yisrael is also the Merkava. Very important to understand. Now you understand what the Chazal mean. The Gemara says that Bnei Avram is Bnei Rachmanim, that the Jews have three midas. The Baishanim, they're Shemeftiga, Shemeftiga, they're shy, and the Bnei Rachmanim, they have the midah of compassion. Chazal say that the Jews have these midas. They're also Gimli Chasodim. Chazal has the kasha. But what the kasha is, the idea is, what do you mean they embody these things? What does that have to do with the Avos? The answer is because the Avos implanted their shirish and their neshama, therefore it goes through every neshama of Klal Yisrael. So actually one could say that if you do not have these midas, you are not a Jew. In fact, there are Chazal in the Gemara actually use this test of who is Jewish or not to figure out who is a Jew. They actually see that if somebody does not have the inyan of busha, of shame, of shyness, of embarrassment, which is a good midah, because that brings in the midah of charota, of having, it's the opposite of gaiva, and if you don't have the midah of rachmanis, which is compassion, instead you have the midah of achzorius, and you have the midah of gaiva, you're a goy. You're not a yid. Because a Jew must have these midas. Why? Because they were implanted by the Avos. That's what they mean. This is actually an acid test for who a Jew is and who is not a Jew. That's why you see that one of the midas that identify Goyim basically is the midah of Gaivan Achzorius. The midah of arrogance and the midah of cruelty. That's a midah which is very, very much surrounding Goyish activities, because you see when they take over a nation, what they do to the nation, you can see that the Goyim are very much involved in arrogance and achzorius. But Klal Yisrael, because of the Avos, have implanted in them the midas of Chesed, which of course is Rachmanus, the midah of Gvura and Tferes and beauty and truth and so on, and this comes of course from the Avos, because they implanted in their souls. And since their souls were the roots of all Klal Yisrael, we who are a part of them have that intuitively and automatically in our neshamas. Doesn't have to be developed. It can be corrupted, unfortunately, but it doesn't really have to be developed in that sense. And this is what it's meant by, this is the tasks of the Avos, to not only develop in terms of themselves, but of course to communicate that into all of Klal Yisrael and to leave it as an inheritance for all their descendants, to carry on their avodah. Now, that statement may surprise you, but one has to understand what it means. Now, you may ask a question. Well, you see Goyim who have kindness. We're going to say that Jews have a monopoly on kindness and so on, and Goyim don't have this at all. It's not true. Goyim also do acts of charity, and they have many charitable institutions and so on. But the idea there is this, the difference is this, that a Jew has it built into his soul, intuitive, automatically. A Goy has to learn it externally in every generation. That's the difference. That a Goy adopts it externally. Number one, that a Goy can have compassion and chesed and so on, but he always has to learn it and therefore make it part of his personality. It's always appendaged to his basic personality. Therefore, it can always be lost. That's why when you see the incredible idea that they say many times that during the war, the Holocaust, when Goyim there were many Jews who were friendly with Goyim, and their own neighbors turned them in. You see that idea? And somebody once told me a story in Slabotka, where there was a janitor who was a guy, and when Slabotka was destroyed during the war, he himself personally killed over 34 yeshiva guys, and he was many yeshiva guys, and he was a janitor there for 34 years. So the question, how can this be? How can a guy even living with a Jew for so many years and seeing, especially in the yeshiva and in the Holocaust, you live with Jews, you see the chesed that Jews practice and so on. How all of a sudden that as soon as the opportunity to practice evil and gaiva and cruelty presents itself, immediately you become an incredibly cruel person. And the answer to that is because a guy intuitively does not possess this midah, he has to learn it. It's external. And as such, even if he learns it, if the appropriate time comes, he can shed it. So you can be friends with a guy, unfortunately, for years and years. And if the appropriate time comes where all of a sudden he has to divide his loyalties, right? He'll sell you down the river just as quick as if he didn't know you. And not only sell you down the river or do horrendous things to you, but not only will he not acknowledge your friendship, but he will do incredible cruel acts to you. That's what a guy is capable of. So the superficiality of the midas of goyim is the difference. That by Yidden it's internal, it's truly a part of their nature, and by a goy it's not truly part of his nature. That it's a superficial appendage to the goy, and that it can be shed when the right opportune moment comes. This is the answer to that question, the difference between the midah of when the Ovis worked on it and when a goy has that midah. And also there's another idea that when a goy has those midas, it's not because the goy truthfully and intrinsically realized the importance of making that a midah in himself, but he basically does it for external reasons, because he was brought up in childhood like that. As parents, society says you have to be good, and so on. Again, the externals, it's fear that makes the goy a civilized nation. That's why Chazal say that if you remove ilmole, mura malchus, if the fear of the kingdom, if civilization, in other words government, if that was removed, then they would swallow you living. They wouldn't even wait until you died. They would swallow you balu chayim. In Ovis it says, Masechta Ovis, they would swallow you while you were alive. Can you imagine the achzoris of goyim? If you remove the fear of the governments, because we see every time you have an anarchy or a rebellion in one of these South American countries, they go crazy. Look what happened when French revolted. I mean, they beheaded thousands of people. It was incredible what was going on. The same idea. So you have those three fundamental differences. That by a Jew it's internal in his soul. By a goy is external. By a Jew, it's not an appendage. Therefore, it cannot be removed. So it cannot be removed. A Jew has to fight not to be a ben rachamin. You really got to fight hard not to do it, because he's going against his nature. Whereas by a goy, since it's an appendage, it can be removed in the right circumstances. Right? There's the second idea we see, and the third idea is the idea that what inculcates these midas tovas in a goy is fear. It's not a genuine desire to be this way. Yeah. However, by a Jew, what inculcates it is not a fear, a murah. It's a genuine desire that emanates from his neshama, of course, because it's already built in his neshama. Those are three fundamental differences between a Yid and a goy in those midas tovas. And of course, the Jew has it because Chazal, or rather the Ovis, worked on it for hundreds of years, because each one lived almost 200 years. They worked on it in the sum total of 600 years to make sure that these midas would be part of their shirish. And we'll also understand what that is much better later on when I talk about goyim, the whole concept of goyim, and what happened between a Jew and a goy. And we'll understand the idea of a shirish and that which is not a shirish. Like I said, remember, this is all part of the structure of what you have to know, the concepts, before we get really into the Ovis. But I got into Avram just to explain, to give some idea of the life of Avram. But the truth is, we must know these concepts and structure in terms of why the Ovis are doing what they're doing. And then when you learn Chumash, you really can see it. That the whole lives was centered around those four ideas, or rather three ideas, and the fourth idea was Avram and Yaakov. And of course, as I mentioned now, that the whole idea was to bring this to their descendants, where they would implant these ideas in Klal Yisrael. In other words, that the idea that Avram and Yaakov worked on the initiation and finalization process of the concept, so therefore all Jews are now a masakin, can correct or damage the Bria. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov worked on their individual midas, which I'll get into. Therefore all Jews have those midas as part of their shirish, mamish neshama, intuitively, internally, and is not motivated by externals, nor can it be removed at all. A Jew has to fight himself to remove those midas. Also, that Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are busy proclaiming the Rebbeinu Shalom. Jews are busy throughout 4,000 years of Jewish history. Jews have had only one mission: to proclaim the Rebbeinu Shalom throughout the world. Right? That's the third idea. And the fourth idea that the Ovis left to Jews, of course, is that just like they were involved in those two tikkunim of Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David, in other words, always combating evil and subjugating it by remaining steadfastly righteous, and also promoting Kedusha, therefore all Klal Yisrael is involved in those tikkunim. So we see that the Ovis are truly patriarchs, originators. They are the genesis of Klal Yisrael. Mitzad shirish. See the incredible difference. What the Ovis did, which I will examine later when I talk about Goyim, is that whatever they did somehow changed their nefesh, the neshama, and therefore we who have that soul, parts of the neshama, have those intuitively as part of our nature to do. Therefore, in that sense, we have the schus of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. That's why we automatically know what to do, because all this is ingrained, embodied in the neshama itself. And the Ovis were able to do that because they were still on the madrega called shroshim, roots, which the Goyim had lost, which I will explain at a future date. Very important to understand. That's where they're able to do it. And that's why we as Klal Yisrael have it. Now, to go further. Now we understand, going back a little into Avram, why Chazal say in the Gemara Brachos that until Avram Avinu from the day that the Rebbeinu Shalom created the universe, nobody but Avram called him an Adon, a master. That's what Chazal say. And what that means is because, of course, that the task of Avram is to promote the Rebbeinu Shalom as Adon, as king, right? As the supreme ruler of the Bria. And of course Avram was basically the first one who mentioned that to all the peoples of the earth in its complete profundity. You know, he understood the depth of that statement of Yichud Shlitosai, that God is the absolute authority and ruler over everything, not just a small area, but that his influence and hashpah and control pervades all creation. This is the idea that Chazal say. So we see therefore that Avram was involved with what? With the task of initiating, or rather promoting the idea of that the Rebbeinu Shalom is a melech, a king throughout the entire universe, an Adon. The other ideas we see, of course, from the fact that Avram was also an initiator, because obviously the whole bris was between him and the Rebbeinu Shalom. That's the second task. The third task we see Avram was involved, because the Medrash says very interestingly, there's a Medrash, Sheikh Toiv, that says, Omer Rav Ruvain, that Rav Ruvain says that all the people were asleep in the world until Avram came and aroused them, and he woke them up from their sleep, and he said that the Rebbeinu Shalom is the master. He told them that the world is filled of the presence of the Rebbeinu Shalom. That's the first task, right? The proclaiming king. And then it says that the world was asleep. Again, asleep means that they were not involved, it was unknown to them. And of course Avram aroused them means that he proclaimed that, promoted that throughout his life. And the second thing it says that all people were asleep to the fact of the chesed, kindness in the universe, until Avram came and proclaimed that by opening up an inn. It's his house. What does that mean? That all people did not only not realize that the Rebbeinu Shalom was a melech, but they didn't realize his attributes. So Avram did both. He proclaimed God a king, right? And that's what the first Chazal mean, that he called him an Adon, or that he aroused the nations that God is a king. And the second idea, that he proclaimed the attributes of the Rebbeinu Shalom, that the Rebbeinu Shalom is chesed, and he imitated that attribute. That's the way he proclaimed it. And he did that by opening an inn and saying, the chesed isn't mine, it comes from the Rebbeinu Shalom. So that Medrash tells us that Avram, of course, were involved in those two ideas: proclaim God as king, and to exemplify, personify the attribute of God, which is chesed. That's the two fundamental tasks. And of course, besides the initiation idea that he made a covenant, he was also involved, of course, with the hispashtus kedusha, which means to spread all these ideas throughout the Bria. That's the idea of Avram. And now we see that how Chazal fit when we know that these are the tafkidim of the Avos. Now, what's important to understand also, so far, in order to sum up, I'll just sum up, in other words, that the Avos who are their Merkava have basically 4 tafkidim, or really 3, and 2 were shared by Avram and Yaakov, right? And that there are basically these 2 avodas, okay, of removing the cheson and the kilkel, of course, which is the tikkunim, and that it's not only the Avos, but it's also Klal Yisrael. This is basically what I have covered until now. Now, the next important things to understand is that, wait a minute, we see that the Avos are proclaiming the attributes of the Rebbeinu Shalom. What are the attributes of the Rebbeinu Shalom? What does that mean when we say the attributes of the Rebbeinu Shalom? The way He revealed it to us. Remember, not Be'atzmusai, but the way He revealed it to us. When we say that the Avos proclaim God as an Adon, as a king, and they reveal His attributes by exemplifying or personifying those attributes, what does that mean? And of course, and they also masakin the Bria. What does all this mean? What is the structure of the concepts of the Rebbeinu Shalom? Now, in order to understand that, well, I'll have to use a couple of terms which are Kabbalistic, but don't be frightened. I'll explain basically what they mean, and we'll go and we'll proceed there, because in order to really understand the Avos, because we can see now that we have a clearer picture of what the general avoid of the Avos are. In order to really understand them, we have to understand the Rebbeinu Shalom, because the Avos are nothing more than individuals who are bearing as chariots the Rebbeinu Shalom into the Bria. So the question is, who is the Rebbeinu Shalom in terms of his midas, right? That's what we said, that the Avos are nothing more than individuals, just like Klal Yisrael, who are teaching the universe, bringing that into the Bria, that the Rebbeinu Shalom is king and his attributes. And therefore, they're bringing that message into the Bria, and that becomes the tikkun of the Bria. But the question, of course, is, who is the Rebbeinu Shalom mitzad his attributes? Right? Because that's what the Avos are supposed to tell, supposed to instruct and promote. So we must now concern ourselves with what is the basic understanding of the attributes of the Rebbeinu Shalom. What is the structure of that understanding? However, I'm going to see that that time is running out. I will have to begin that the next year, to begin going into the structure and the concepts of the attributes of the Rebbeinu Shalom in terms of a little Kabbalistically, but I say don't get frightened, and that'll be next week. And then again we'll proceed, after we understand the Rebbeinu Shalom, to go back to the Avos and understand the 3 midas of the Avos, and then I'll continue in the actual lives of the Avos. Again, to go back and to explain the structure of these concepts mitzad the Rebbeinu Shalom, then to go back into the midas itself that the Avos are carrying into the Bria, then to go back into the lives of the Avos, starting from Yitzchak, showing how it personifies in the actual behavior and the events of the Chumash itself.